Satoru Gojo, the only honored one throughout heaven and earth, the strongest sorcerer of the modern age, the man who single-handedly shifted the balance of the entire Jujutsu world. Today I'll be breaking down this absolute beast of a character, delving into everything from his character design to moral conflicts. Before I go any further, I should preface that this video will include manga spoilers up to chapter 236. I will also be using background footage from the anime, so if you haven't seen it yet, please turn this off and go watch that. I'm entertaining, but not quite that entertaining. Considering you clicked on this video, I guarantee you won't be disappointed. So why Gojo? This is a character that I've been enjoying immensely over the past several months. There's an extraordinary appeal to Satoru that is impossible to deny. One needs to look no further than the chaos that erupted out of the release of chapter 236 to witness this. This appeal is what prompted me to make this video in the first place. Why am I so drawn to this character? What aspects of him are so captivating to me? It's these questions that I will seek to answer here. For the rest of the video, I will assume you have a baseline understanding of the character, and again, I highly recommend reading the manga prior to watching this, as it will be very spoiler heavy. Also, I'm not going to be breaking down his power or abilities, just because other people have done that before and far more capably than I would be able to. So with that said, let's begin. The first thing we as an audience are presented with when engaging with any form of visual media is the design of a character. Often a large percentage of our initial impression is based merely on how someone or something looks. This is especially true with anime or manga. Due to the nature of the medium, individual artists can make drastic stylistic changes to design that wouldn't be possible in a live action variant. So what about Gojo's design? Well, there are certainly some standout features. Immediately we're drawn to the blindfold, as our mind races to fill in the void of what it could possibly be concealing. This alone provides Gojo with an aura of mystery before he even has the ability to say a single word. It also is an effective metaphor for his overwhelming power that lies just beneath the surface. The next most striking feature is obviously his hair. To anyone who is a frequent enjoyer of anime or manga, this is a common trope. If you knew nothing about a particular source material and instead were shown a lineup of all of the characters in the show and attempted to guess the main one based on who had the most unusual colored hair, there's a 75% chance you'd probably be right. I do think there's a tad bit more significance here in Jujutsu Kaisen, especially when we also consider his striking blue eyes. In combination, these give Gojo an almost otherworldly feel, especially when compared to many of the other characters in the series who are a bit more bland. This is something I'll play into many of my future points, and while I won't necessarily bring it up, it's something good to keep in mind. Lastly, another thing to make note of here is his height. Gojo is canonically 6'3", and is often depicted as towering over those around him. Height is one of the easiest ways for storytellers to depict power and status, as it taps into a very instinctual, sociological, and psychological phenomena, that being height is strength. However, something that is interesting is often when we see Gojo talking to his students, it's done from a seated position. This doesn't necessarily mean anything in and of itself, but I thought it was interesting. It could easily be understood in light of his personality, though. And speaking of personality, that will be the next character aspect that we tackle. You would be hard-pressed to find anyone who didn't agree that one of Gojo's best traits, and certainly one of his most definable, is his indomitable ego. We see this time and time again throughout the course of the story. He is incredibly self-assured, bordering on conceited, and isn't afraid to show his power. This often leads to him toying with his opponents, only really getting serious when he is pushed to his limit either physically or emotionally, neither of which are easy feats. However, that's not to say Gojo isn't aware of his limitations. This is something that I'll touch on more later, but I did want to put it here as he isn't simply being arrogant for its own sake. Continuing on, another major aspect of Gojo's personality is his carefree, almost whimsical attitude. Even when faced with danger, he maintains a lighthearted, almost jovial demeanor. I'd imagine some of this nonchalance is born of being practically unrivaled, but I do think that it isn't just that. If that were the case, it would be inconsistent for him to maintain it after losing to Toji. I've seen it theorized in some circles, Reddit, that this is merely a coping mechanism, but I've always found the arguments supporting that hypothesis lackluster. In addition, it does discredit to Gojo's moral and mental fortitude, and would be in contrast with the rest of his personality. That aside, I think Nanami hits the nail on the head with this panel, where he compares Mahito to Gojo. And yet, don't let this cavalier attitude fool you. Gojo cares deeply for his colleagues and is particularly protective of his students. willing to go against all of high jujutsu society for their sakes, as we often see him do, particularly in the case of Megami, Yuta, and Yuji. And while I think there's a compelling narrative reason for this, I'm going to reserve that for when we dive into his motivation and goals. Lastly, one of Gojo's most underrated traits is his exceptionally strategic mind, especially in regards to combat situations, but also with other things. He's well aware of the politics and power struggles at play within Jujutsu society, and while many of his particular moves might be considered strong-arming, I think it's important to remember that he does that because he can, not because he needs to. It's merely the most efficient way for him to reach his desired ends. As for combat, well, if nothing else, his fight against the King of Curses illustrated that Gojo is exceptionally talented in the art of strategy and tactics. We also see this tactical brilliance against the cursed spirits in Shibuya, where he displays one of the best scenes in the entire series with the 0.2 second domain expansion. I debated whether I wanted to put motivations and goals next, or relationships, both feeding to each other, but ultimately I decided that many of Gojo's current relationships exist because of his particular motivations. So with that said, let's discuss what drives the strongest sorcerer in the world. Now, desires and ambitions are almost never static. They're always shifting and contorting, sometimes slowly and other times rapidly, if not changing altogether. They're constantly subject to our experiences and observations, and this is absolutely true of Gojo as well. During the hidden inventory arc, we are presented with a man who purportedly doesn't care for much beyond strength, someone who even considers protecting the weak to be an excessive burden. However, over the course of the arc, it becomes pretty clear that this exterior that he presents to the rest of the world might not be truly representative of his inner beliefs. For example, despite his complaining, he takes his duty to protect Amani, the star plasma vessel, very seriously, and not even just for Tengen's sake. After all, we find out that towards the end of the arc, Gojo and Geto agreed that should Amani refuse the merger, they would support her, even so much as to go against Tengen himself. This doesn't exactly suggest someone who finds protecting the weak to be a burden. Or perhaps, while he may believe that it is, it illustrates that Gojo cares more about said people, Amani in this instance, than he does the burden itself. And then, of course, the climax. Gojo fights Toji and nearly dies. Amani is killed. Gojo is awakened, fully coming into his own as the honored one, and kills Toji. This particular sequence of events left such an impression on Gojo that I think it's hard to understate how much. For example, consider the following scan. In it, Gojo relies on Geto's moral compass when considering whether or not to kill the religious followers. But what reasoning does Geto give? It's not the fact that they aren't complicit, but rather that killing them would serve no purpose, as the ones in charge and connected to the Jujutsu world were already gone. This, without a doubt, leads to the inception of one of Gojo's largest goals, the reformation of Jujutsu society. Also, these events surely tie into Gojo's desire to protect the best years of youth, as evidenced in this scan with Yuta. After all, we must remember that Gojo is only 16 during the hidden inventory arc. 16! And so fast forward to modern day, what motivates Gojo? Well, I think we can break it down into 3 different things. First, the complete uprooting of the Jujutsu world, ridding it of its corruption and rot. He seeks to dismantle the old systems of power that ensure only a select privileged few from particular bloodlines maintain control. Second, he wishes to nourish and nurture the next generation of sorcerers, especially his students, to help them reach their full potential and live in a world less dictated by the harmful traditions of current Jujutsu society. While this does play into the first motivation, I think it's separate enough to justify its own point. And third, he wishes to foster someone capable of understanding him and understanding the solitude of absolute strength. Now, to most people watching who have read the manga or even just watched the anime, the first 2 points are pretty self-explanatory. There's not much deep dive needed to come across them. Given that, I won't focus on them too much. Instead, I'm going to jump into the next topic, which is Gojo's relationships. I do this because it's absolutely intertwined with that third motivation, the desire to truly connect with somebody. To even the most casual reader, there's an obvious symbolism between Gojo's power to bring infinity into reality, preventing anyone or anything from touching him, and the isolation that one feels from being considered the strongest. Gojo himself explains this isolation during the now infamous airport scene. He uses the metaphor of a blooming flower to represent the line that he drew, separating himself from everybody else. Now, at first glance, this seems apt, as you really can't ask a flower to comprehend life as a gardener. But I think of greater importance is the fact that it suggests Gojo is a conflicted man. Now, why do I say that? Well, considering Gojo's character arc, it's pretty clear that he very much does feel isolated to some degree by his power. We see this explicitly in the Hidden Inventory Act, and while maturing has definitely helped bridge the gap between himself and others, we still see some of this loneliness in the current time. The aforementioned metaphor is a testament to that. So where's the confliction? That there lies in the fact that even though Gojo drew the line in the sand, I believe he desperately tried to pull someone across it with him. Returning to the metaphor, he yearned to find a flower capable of understanding him. Why? Well, honestly, to me, that's quite simple. In spite of all Gojo's insane abilities and ridiculous hacks, he's ultimately just a man who wanted to relate with somebody. And now I offer a few things in support of this theory. First off, consider the people that had the greatest impact on Gojo's life, Toji and Geto. Geto, the only man whom Gojo considers to be a true friend, was a special grade sorcerer and the closest thing to a peer that Gojo had. And Toji, the only person besides Sukuna to best him in combat. Both were exceptionally powerful individuals, and both left a lasting mark on Gojo that proceeded well beyond both of their respective deaths. They were, going back to the metaphor, closest to the line. Now let's turn our attention to those individuals whom Gojo either sought out or intervened on their behalf. And of course, I'm referring to Megumi, Yuta, and Yuji. In each of these cases, Gojo went out of his way to protect and foster them. Why? Of course, there are multiple reasons, I think, but one that often goes unnoticed is the fact that each of these individuals represented someone who Gojo saw as capable of rivaling himself. First off is Megumi, the son of the man who almost killed him. Even if Satoru wasn't aware of Megumi's curse technique, though given his position as de facto leader of the Gojo clan, I find that to be kind of dubious, I think that being Tojo's son carried enough weight in this particular regard. And then whenever his curse technique did become apparent, Gojo makes it obvious that he saw the potential in Megumi to rival himself, based on the knowledge regarding the previous 6 Eyes user losing to the 10 Shadows user. Yuta and Yuji, we have more explicit evidence that suggests Gojo considers these individuals as people capable of rivaling himself. Consider the following scan, for instance. Also, in Yuji's case, Gojo knows that Sukuna's techniques would eventually be engraved into his body. If we keep this in mind, it makes sense why Gojo put special emphasis on these 3 students. And that's not to say that he doesn't care about Nobara, Maki, Panda, etc., but rather that in them he didn't see the same potential to ascend from flower to gardener, to cross that line, if you will. To me, this paints the picture of a man who just wanted to find someone capable of truly understanding him, and ultimately of understanding the burden of strength. It's also why, despite some grievances with Chapter 36, which I do have, I don't consider it to be a character assassination, as some do. Gojo truly did want to find someone capable of besting him. And while there might be ulterior motives to many of the choices that he made, and I think it's obvious that he came to care deeply about his students, that desire to connect with someone never went away, nor should it have. After all, despite all of his nigh godlike abilities, Gojo is still merely human. And with all that, I'll move into the conclusion. Truthfully, there are so many more different nuances and aspects of this character that you could talk about, but if I brought up every single one, I would be here for hours, and I just don't really fancy that. Instead, I'll finish this video by answering my initial question. What is the appeal behind Satoru Gojo? Gojo is a man who has a strong identity. He knows who he is, what he wants, and has a plan to accomplish it. He's charismatic, passionate, powerful, and kind. It's this identity, this absolute self-assuredness, that makes him so appealing to viewers. It's also why I can't wait to find out which decision he makes. Will he go south and stay the same, or will he go north and change? In my opinion, regardless of which direction the story takes, I think Gojo will go down as one of anime and manga's greats.